If you're looking for a wide, affordable autofocusing lens in the Sony E-mount system, then this might just be the lens for you. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Viltrox AF 20mm f2.8 lens for Sony and answer the question as to whether this is a lens you should consider for your kit. Now, for full disclosure, Viltrox sent me this lens to do a review on, though no money exchanged hands. They do not get any input into this video, nor do they get to see it before I post it. However, I do get to keep the lens as an FYI. So of course, to talk about the specs and features of the lens, this lens goes as wide open as f2.8 all the way to an aperture of f16. The lens has a minimum focusing distance of just 0.19 meters, roughly 7.5 inches, so you can get extremely close to your subject when shooting. And the lens has a 52mm front filter thread for being able to adapt different filters and step-up rings to the lens. Now, as you can see, this lens is extremely small and compact. This probably would qualify as a pancake type of lens in terms of its size and construction, and it weighs in at just 157 grams or 5.5 ounces. One interesting thing you'll note on the rear of the lens is that it does include a USB-C port for being able to provide firmware updates to the lens as Viltrox releases them. You'll notice the lens design is extremely minimal itself. There are truly no controls, buttons, or switches on this thing, just a manual focus ring that adjusts pretty nicely. And of course, in terms of what the lens comes with, it does include a nice box, as you can see right here, a small lens hood for the lens that attaches pretty easily, the expected front and rear lens caps, a series of manuals for basic use and operation of the lens, and a nice padded bag for being able to store and transport the lens as well. But of course, now that we've talked about the specs and features of the lens, we should actually cover how this lens performs in just everyday use. And to start with this, we could talk about sharpness. So here in Lightroom, we have some test shots that I captured on my A7R5 in uncompressed RAW, just shooting a typical brick wall to see how the lens fares in terms of sharpness at the center and at the corners. At the center here at f2.8, you will see we have an extremely sharp lens, and that remains just as true at f4, perhaps even more so at f5.6, at f8, and only slightly tapering off here as we get towards f11, and perhaps ever so slightly more at f16. Now you'll notice sharpness at the corners will certainly not be as good in this case. At f2.8 here, I can certainly say that I've seen worse in terms of corner sharpness performance, but this pales in comparison to what we just saw at the center moments ago. Now stepping through this, we will see this improve around the f4, f5.6, f8 range, only to slightly taper off again towards f11 and f16. Again, unless you're pixel peeping the corners of your images, this might not be a major issue or deal breaker, but something to note. One thing you will also see here, pretty much regardless of aperture, this is at f2.8, and this is at f16, is that we definitely do have a bit of barrel distortion and or pin cushioning going on here. Now, while this could probably be resolved by a series of profile corrections, I'm unable to find at least a specific profile here in Lightroom Classic for the lens. That said, you might be able to have some luck here picking a profile for a different lens, whether a similar focal length or even another model from Viltrox to attempt to correct this, but your mileage may vary. Now, of course, we should also talk about the shooting experience with a lens like this. I have to say a smaller and more compact lens design really does lend itself well to a lot of different shooting situations. And while you'll be able to make use of its very wide focal length at the 20mm range in full frame, because yes, this is a full frame lens, you will find it just as well at home at the 30mm end when in APS-C crop mode or on a dedicated Sony APS-C body. There is something to be said about a nice pancake lens shooting experience, which yes, if you watch my review on the TT Artisan 25mm f2 lens, which I believe a link to above and in the description below that you can check out, you will know that I had very similar thoughts around shooting with that particular lens. Wide-angle lenses always provide a unique perspective that just other focal lengths can't get, and while there are a lot of wide-angle lenses on the market, seldom will you find one this small and compact that also does autofocus. Which, yes, now that we mention it, let's talk about the autofocus performance as well. I was honestly extremely impressed with how well the autofocus on this lens performed. Sure, certainly not Sony G Master or G level quality, but I was easily able to use regular features, be it touch tracking, whether in general face and eye auto tracking, such as here with my Sony A7R5. And yes, even in less than ideal situations where there was glare or other things that could have impeded focus, I was generally impressed with how this lens performed. In many situations, as I was shooting with this, I wasn't noticing any extreme differences in autofocus performance that I would typically come to find in G and G Master lenses, and that really is saying a lot. Now, in terms of bokeh, I would say that is fine for what this lens is. You'll notice I mentioned the 7 aperture blades that the lens had previously. Perhaps not surprisingly for a lens at this price point, the lens has a septagon or septagonal shaped bokeh design as well. Again, wide-angle lenses maybe aren't known for their bokeh to begin with, but something to keep in mind if you're looking to use it for that specific type of shot. Also worth noting, yes, this lens does exhibit some focus breathing, and of course because it is a third-party lens, you will not be able to benefit from a feature like breathing comp compensation with Sony's different cameras. That said, I have to say this wasn't a major issue that I found when using the lens, and in fact, I found this lens breathed a bit less than even another popular option at the same focal length, which yes, let's talk about that. If there is another popular option at the 20mm focal length other folks are likely going to think about or consider, it is probably the 20mm f1.8G lens. Now yes, this is a lens that I own myself, and I've done a whole separate review on this lens that I will leave a link to above and in the description below that you can check out. But just to offer a brief summary of my thoughts here, as you can tell there is a big difference in size and weight between the two of these, with the Viltrox certainly coming out on top if you're looking for something much smaller. That said, if you're someone that likes your lens to be fully featured in terms of different buttons and switches and controls, whether from the aperture control ring to the autofocus and manual focus switch, the custom button, etc., then it's the 20mm G that is going to come out on top. Now I will say the build quality and design of the G is going to also have a leg up on the Viltrox, with of course the G also being dust and moisture resistant and weather sealed. Of course there is a big difference between f2.8 versus f1.8. Yes, I will say that extra stop and a third of light might have made a difference, say in getting shots like this one you're seeing now, but in truth, if you know how to use your camera and the right lens for the right situation, I think you will certainly be pleased and have more than enough latitude with f2.8. Also worth noting, I shoot a lot of concerts. In fact, if you've been watching this channel for a bit, you will know that is the case. I have several videos on that topic on this channel already. I typically use my 20mm G for getting a wide angle shot of many of the different concerts I filmed, and I recently tried replacing that with the Viltrox 20mm on my A7S III for a recent concert shoot. And while I ended up locking off the shot in manual focus, I was extremely pleased with what this lens provided. Extremely sharp, very detailed. Truthfully, I don't think anyone, or maybe most importantly myself, would notice any difference had I shot this with the 20mm G. And to maybe even go a step further in that comparison, you can take a look at some sample shots here that I captured with my Sony A7R5, the Viltrox AF 20mm f2.8, and the Sony 20mm f1.8G. Without telling you which shot is which, would you actually notice a difference? Well, you'll have the ability to test this out yourself here, but I have to say, at least based on what I've seen, these lenses might be closer than you might think. Of course, there is a big, and I mean big, price difference between these two 20mm options, so we should talk about that. The Viltrox 20mm retails for around $158 US. When compared to a lens like the Sony 20mm G, which typically retails for around $800 to $900 US, you're going to find there is a major price difference between these two. So yes, while you could say that a stop and a third of light, or some extra buttons or switches, or some additional build quality is a nice, and I mean very nice option to have with the 20mm G, you're going to have to weigh whether this is worth 5 to 6 times, yes, 5 to 6 times the price of what a lens like the Viltrox 20mm offers. So all in all, what are my final thoughts on the Viltrox AF 20mm f2.8? When it comes to a compact, wide prime that handles autofocus well, I think this is one of the best options that is out there in the Sony E-mount system. If nothing else, even if you're someone that tends to go for more premium options in this space, it is hard to ignore the price point of this thing. For cheaper than what some would even pay for a manual focus lens or a much less shallow depth of field prime, you really get a ton of bang for buck with this thing, and I think that is hard to ignore. Even though my expectations for this lens when I got it were relatively low, after testing this lens out and putting it through its paces, the impression it left me with was very high. So that is my take on the Viltrox AF 20mm f2.8 lens. Now hopefully this video has been of some help to you. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if it has. I have a number of lens reviews on this channel that I would definitely encourage you to check out, and yes, there will be many more on the way. For now, that is all I have to say, so thanks for watching.